Well, welcome everybody to the July Animal Care Wednesday webinar. I'm Heidi Carroll and I work with SDSU Extension over in Brookings, South Dakota as a livestock stewardship field specialist, as well as I coordinate our state's beef quality assurance program. I was going to co-present with Joe Darrington. However, he just informed me he had a vet call, so if he can join in later, he'll also co-present with me. Little background on the Animal Care Wednesday webinars. It's a multi-state collaboration to bring some animal care and animal well-being topics of interest to the 5-state region. And today we're going to focus a little bit on cattle handling facilities. If you have any technical difficulties while we go about today, go ahead and use the chat box feature. We are recording today's webinar, and that recording will be up on our Animal Care Wednesday webinar website that you can access later. I don't see anybody having any difficulty, so just for everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and kind of get started here. So the topic for today is cattle handling facilities, some common issues and some hopeful simple fixes. This is all coming from a project that was funded and we did several cattle handling workshops and some ranch visits, and I'll explain that a little bit more detail. But my collaborators on that project was Joe Darrington, who was our former SDSU Extension livestock engineer, and then also Julie Walker, who was our SDSU Extension beef specialist. So a little background on our project. I can get the slides to advance here. There we go. So our project was actually started in the fall of 2016. The goal of our project really was identifying the problem that working with beef cattle has one of the highest incidence rates of non-fatal injuries in agriculture. So our goal in writing this project was to hopefully help minimize some of those risks associated with working cattle. And to do that, we put together workshops and a curriculum with the workshops to really emphasize efficiency and safety for both cattle and people. Because we all know that everybody likes to get the job done quick and efficient, but we also have to make sure everybody's staying safe in the process. So our workshop participants were challenged to increase their working knowledge of cattle behavior to hopefully then implement those low stress handling techniques that we were going to teach. We were also looking at handling facility preventative maintenance and doing walkthroughs before you even start working with your cattle, and to hopefully then improve or decrease preventable injuries relating to facilities in both cattle and people. So kind of the overall goal there is hopefully then cattlemen would understand the impact of human interactions they are having with their cattle and the behavior, and then hopefully have positive impacts on the animal health and performance, which then ties back to their ranch profitability as well. Additionally, cattlemen would then learn and implement the low stress techniques and evaluate their facilities to minimize those risks, and hopefully then continue to improve those facilities over time and keep them safe for both the people working and their cattle as well. So this grant was actually funded through North Central Extension Risk Management Education Center, which is also part of the USDA funding. And you can see the website there, the ncerme.org. So if you're looking for applicable funding sources to maybe do certain types of cattle handling workshops or something related to kind of mitigating the risks of handling livestock, this may be a great funding source for you to consider in your own programming in your own states. So some of the curriculum itself that we put together, part of our curriculum was PowerPoint presentations, and we had kind of 3 main ones that we focused on, with cattle handling basics, introducing the cattle behavior, introducing the low stress handling techniques. Then we focused on cattle facility evaluation, and so that really focused on all types of facilities, not just permanent or temporary, but really trying to be helping people understand the different critical areas of their facility that they needed to to prepare, to maintain, and really evaluate before they bring cattle through it. And then our third presentation focused on the carcass value and the potential impacts that poor handling can have on livestock or on handler safety. So that was actually one of the presentations that attendees really found valuable, to really connect what they're doing with their livestock and the people that are helping them, and the potential negative impacts that they were having on their cattle as a result of their techniques or their facilities. A few of the other resources that we utilized in the workshops, we put together 2 different checklists for evaluating facilities. One was just a 1-page quick check for employees. So it's time to go work cattle. You take the checklist out before you're going to go work cattle, make sure the facility's all set up. And then the other checklist we kind of put together with more of a continuous improvement thought in mind for owners and managers. So maybe they already are thinking about updating their equipment and their facility, and this one had a little bit more detail about other things to consider, not just the maintenance side of things, and kind of what their long-term goals for their operation or expanding their operation and cattle handling needs they might have. Other resources also included putting together the standard operating procedures and kind of helping people understand that, yes, it's paperwork. However, it's really important to make sure everybody that's helping you work your cattle is familiar with what your expectations are for how you're going to treat the livestock and how you're going to complete each step in that process. So a couple of just resources that we put together and some examples. We also provided some industry resources. So we utilized a beef quality assurance feed yard assessment, as well as we provided the cow-calf assessment, since South Dakota is pretty diverse in both having feed yards and a large number of cow-calf producers. We also provided them with the BQA cattle care and handling guidelines, just kind of a quick little brochure that they could utilize with any staff or any family members that they just need to brush up on their expectations there. So that's just kind of a glimpse of what our curriculum looked like for our workshops. We hosted 3 full-day workshops, and we also had an invitation at Lake Area Technical Institute, which is one of the 2-year technical colleges in Watertown, South Dakota. So that was kind of a half-day tailored workshop for them specifically. We worked with 118 students at one of the sale barns, kind of doing the condensed version of our workshop. And then our 3 full-day workshops, you can see there, we hosted them in 3 different areas around South Dakota. The agenda was pretty much straightforward. We tried to start right away in the morning, get kind of our classroom material out of the way with 2 of our presentations. And then we would split the groups up, and we would have one group talk about the facility evaluations, working with maybe portable systems, doing a walkthrough of the actual permanent facilities at the host site we were at. And then we flip-flopped those 2 groups. And we would have the group that worked on facilities then also come work with a group of cattle and work them through a facility and really implement some of the techniques that they had done. We also had them actually conduct a facility evaluation on some of the portable equipment, and then kind of being aware of the permanent facilities that we had at the host site if they saw something different there. We ended then with the day kind of with our avoiding discounts and talking about the potential carcass impacts. And so that kind of wrapped all of the stuff together at the end of the day. So kind of just some of the highlights of the workshop, and then I'll get into some of the things that we found about our facility ranch visits. We found that it was really beneficial to have the classroom teaching and then have the immediate application, to have groups of cattle for the participants to work, have several different portable equipment available, as well as a permanent system for them to compare. You can see in these workshop pictures here, we had a pretty wide range of attendees. At one workshop, we had about half of our FFA teenage students, in addition to half producers. Some of the other workshops were more just adult producers, a few kind of teenage ag students as well. A lot of our discussions regarding working cattle focused on, do you need portable systems or do you need to invest in a permanent system? The discussions of, well, do we have a central working facility and bring all of our cattle from a distance, or can we just have a mobile facility and be more efficient moving it across different pastures? So it was really interesting to see all the different producers' needs start to come out and kind of what they were considering. A few of the other highlights with cattle and with being outdoors, you always have a potential weather challenge no matter what time of year that you're trying to host workshops. One of the other things that was really critical for success is being aware of the type of cattle that you're able to bring in for your attendees to work with. We had great host sites. Most of our cattle were your average type of Angus crosses. None of them were necessarily overly rangy or excitable. However, we could definitely tell that any attendee that had less cattle experience still thought that some of these cattle were a little bit too wild for them to feel comfortable implementing some of those. So just always being aware and realizing that you may have a mix of really experienced cattlemen, you may have a mix of less experienced people or people who may have more experience with dairy breeds. So just picking out those people really fast and kind of knowing what jobs you might want to give them when you actually do the hands-on cattle activities, so you have a successful and safe workshop. So that was the workshop portion of our project. As part of the evaluation of our grant project, we built in ranch visits with the attendees of our workshops. So we offered personalized ranch visits to 2 attendees per our full-day workshops. And we ended up doing 5 visits total. One person decided they didn't want to inconvenience us. But we were able to meet with 5 different ranches and really go through, spend a day out on their ranch, walk through how they bring their cattle into their operation, what husbandry practices they're doing or are considering doing that they might need to expand their facilities for. The really interesting thing is we had a wide range of types of operations and sizes of herds. We ranged anywhere from 30 to 50 head type farms all the way up to 500 where both family members are working full-time on the ranch. So it was a really great spread of cattlemen that we were able to meet with, and we'll kind of go through and see some of the common things that came out here in the discussions with our 5 producers. A lot of it depended on if they were trying to decide to build new or just modify existing facilities. So when we were working with several producers, they were discussing, it's time to tear everything out, let's start over. So we discussed, is the siting from the existing one suitable for the expansion that they were trying to do? Talking about the slope of the land, if they had hills, if they had appropriate drainage, depending on what time of year they were going to be working their cattle. Really helping them think through what husbandry practices they were going to do, and then make sure they match the equipment that they were thinking to get with the actual husbandry practices. You don't necessarily need a hydraulic chute with a palpation cage if you're never really going to do any AI or preg checking on the farm. So really helping them be conscientious of their economic input, but also them making sure that they're not inconveniencing themselves and not having the equipment to make it a safe and efficient process as well. Some other things that we really tried to help focus on was helping them understand that you need to think about your human space at the same time as you're thinking about your cattle space. Think about where people are going to walk, how are they going to get between different spaces. Think about the path the cattle are going, but then also make sure that the handler interaction with those cattle spaces is appropriate to help facilitate cattle flow and keep everybody safe too. In terms of some older facilities where people were just trying to improve the flow or maybe do a little maintenance, we saw a lot of challenges and discussion on shadows and light transitions. We also noticed that some facilities had very short lead-up alleys, and so they weren't necessarily maximizing the efficiency of the number of animals they were trying to work through that facility. definitely saw a large number of drainage or footing issues in terms of may it be dirt surfaces and things like that. And I was kind of surprised also to see a lack of man gates. I think we sometimes take for granted that you need to get from one side to another, and it's not always convenient as you get older to keep jumping that fence, or it's not necessarily as safe to jump that fence, especially when you have your winter coveralls on and the wind is blowing and you have 2 inches of ice on the ground. So that was definitely a topic that we tried to help address, not just from an efficiency, but also from that safety standpoint. And then just help think through the types of materials they had or were able to work with and how they were going to maintain their facilities. So let's jump into some examples here. So the first example that I want to go through is a feedlot that had about a 800 head to 900 head capacity, and they usually did about 1 turn a year. They also had cow-calf operation that they keep some of their own calves and then also purchase calves to feed. So you can see here in kind of the overview of how the pens feed into their working facility. So you have 3 different pens here on the bottom. You have one of the main large dirt pens here and 2 several smaller dirt pens that feed into this larger drover feeding alley. Comes north here leading into the holding pens, and they have kind of a drover's alley here that can function as a holding pen, and then here's your main drover's alley feeding right up into the hoop building you see in the picture that is the actual handling facility. So that drover's alley and handling facility consists of a turret gate tub, has a hydraulic chute. They also have a long curved loadout to load out semis or load out stock trailers as they need. They did modify this permanent facility, and you'll see that here in a few pictures. But this just kind of gives you how the flow of cattle went. So obviously they're working calves and cows. They are also working finished feedlot animals. So it's a pretty wide range of sizes that are coming through. Hence, that's why they went with the hydraulic squeeze chute for a little bit better range of sizes there. So you can see in a couple of pictures, we did visit kind of late spring, and so you can see that they definitely had some rain. However, the biggest challenge that they run into is a lot of mud and footing. And so most of their help is just family members, husband, wife team, a couple of young kids that usually come help work the cattle, and sometimes one part-time worker will come help work cattle as well. So if you had to go out and work these pens, it definitely wasn't a pleasurable experience if that was the day you had to go. You can see most of the drainage ended up landing right smack dab at the gates. So all the cattle, all the people traffic is going right through those areas. So it was definitely a challenge from that perspective. And from the picture here, these 3 lots all drain across these 2 north lots to end up in a pasture lowland that's just kind of to the northeast here. Same with this big lot 1. It all has to drain straight across the drover's alley towards this lot 5 going to the northeast. So drainage did become a little bit of a challenge, and so definitely we talked a lot more about pen maintenance and keeping pens scraped and readjusting and reshaping accordingly. Another unique topic that came up is, so this is a picture of their actual tub, which is a turret gate, so remote controlled swing tub gate here. They mentioned they had a challenge of getting cattle to fill into their chute, which is, you can see here in picture C, the left side of the 2 openings. In picture A, it fills to their loadout. And so they said cattle load just fine. If we're trying to load out, they'll feed right into that alley. But if we're just working cattle and we're trying to get them into the chute, they spend a lot of time spinning in the tub. Now, their lead-up alley here is only holding about 1 to 1.5 animals, so they don't have a large lead-up alley going to their chute, which can kind of decrease the efficiency there. But in these three pictures, you really see why cattle will funnel straight around that curve into the lead-up alley. And in the middle picture labeled B there, if the cattle are on the way outside edge of the curve and you're asking them to go into the chute, there's not a clear exit. But if cattle are on the inside kind of pivot point of the tub, they can completely see that there's a straight shot for the chute. So we started to talk about what the cattle were seeing and why they were starting to see the circling behavior. And to address part of that before we even talked about modifying anything, because they were all ready to kind of rip it out and try to build a makeshift bud box to fill the tub and try to get rid of it. But addressing the stockmanship side was definitely going to be the cheaper free option to discuss first. So from those pictures, we talked a little bit about, well, if your cattle are coming in following the outside edge of that tub, what are they seeing? What's in their line of vision? And the thing that the producers mentioned to us is, since this was a turret gate, their handler that was bringing the cattle up was stopping way, way back, not bringing the cattle all the way up to the turret gate. So this here in the actual picture is the turret gate. And the handlers were stopping way back here at the edge of the building, just shutting this gate here and running the remote control. So the handler was losing constant pressure on those cattle to fill. And so the cattle lost sight of the pressure. They started looking for the pressure, turning around because they didn't see the exit for the chute. So helping them understand that, maybe having that handler follow the cattle all the way up, pressure them in, keep that constant eye contact, and then run the turret gate, and then go back for the next group of cattle. So some simple fixes, talking about stockmanship a little bit more than actual flaw in the facility. I've also had several conversations with producers who have tried to have this setup where you have one tub, you have a loadout, and you have a chute. The biggest challenge here is when cattle follow around that curve, they want to follow the curve and go straight. So straight to that loadout. If you're going to split and have a loadout and want to have a chute in the same location, it's much more efficient to actually have one kind of one loadout, one alley start, and then Y off after you've started your alley, because then you've already got the cattle filled off the tub. You can split it then and they're just following a separate curve, which is actually what the original long facility was, and then that's what they modified when they put in the turret gates in their new chute. In addition to just talking about those minor stockmanship things that they might try to improve, we also talked about putting in man gates. So again, I mentioned it was a husband-wife team, maybe 1 to 2 of their kids help at a time. And so putting in a man gate potentially here, and then we also talked about putting in an additional man gate or implementing a catwalk along. So if they needed an extra man gate and the person to jump around, then they would have an access to do that. So that was one of our main farm visits. Those were the types of things that we definitely saw and had a long discussion about. But definitely things that they could overcome, not having to change a whole lot in their facilities. The biggest challenge for them was definitely going to be the constant pen management and the drainage issues to accommodate that. So then another farm visit, this producer was a cow-calf producer. They had anywhere from 30 to 50 head depending on the year. Kind of a father-son, daughter team that was trying to expand. They more or less did just natural service, but they were definitely looking at doing some AI, doing more preg checking, and trying to expand the herd that way. You can see here, this is their existing working facility. So it's simple, and they have a small herd, so it works for what they need to. They don't need to get a lot of numbers through here. Part of the thing that maybe you catch on to here is that it's a wood structure that's coming out to just a simple head catch. The lead up alley makes a sharp 90-degree turn. That's their lead up alley here. The holding pens is this pen coming down here to the actual little gray tin shed. That's kind of the end of the holding area. And they were actually running cattle from the holding pen through the barn to bring them out and load into this. And they said they were always having challenge bringing cattle back out of the barn, and it was just causing a lot of flow issues. So the definite things that were highlighted was you have multiple outdoor to indoor transitions going on. So you have lighting shadows. If the weather's bad, obviously you have the weather transitions going indoor to outdoor. The time of year that we visited was kind of early spring, transitioning out of winter, so you can still see some snow piles, and they usually work their calves in the fall, which definitely is going to be drier. They have a little footing issue. They have some cement. They've got some drop-offs there, but nothing too serious that they couldn't overcome. It was more or less a handler inconvenience, more so than it would actually probably be an issue for the cattle. The other challenge they also noted was when they had to doctor animals or do anything like that, there really was no good vaccination shot access to the neck given their head catch type. And so they really felt that they wanted to increase their functionality of their chute overall, in addition to gain that access to do some AI and do a lot more preg checking on their herd. And their wood structured facility just didn't give them that option that they were looking for. So a lot of our recommendations that we focused on was on the cattle flow. How could we improve the cattle flow in addition to make it a little bit more user-friendly that way? So as I mentioned, this is a picture of what the existing facility looks. They would bring all their cattle into this top calving pen. The gate to that holding area is right here in the middle of their fence line, so definitely not an ideal place to try to bring your cows and your calves into in the fall. From that holding pen, they then brought them into the barn. They made them do a 90-degree turn out of a small, essentially human walking door into that area just next to the lead-up chute. Essentially, they kind of had a bud box system going on here where they brought them to the end, they shut the barn door, and then they made the cattle make that 90-degree turn coming into the short wood lead-up alley that ran along the barn, and then make another 90-degree turn to get into the head catch. So most of their handler space was coming here with one person bringing cattle all the way from the holding pens to the barn. So the things then that we tried to provide them with several options to overcome some of those 90-degree turns, overcome those indoor-outdoor transitions. So I have 3 different examples here that we provided those producers for some options. This left side, we modified a little bit, just those split between their calving pastures to hopefully then put a gate at the end of a fence line. They were still going to tear out that tin shed anyway, so removing that tin shed, getting rid of that obstacle, building a little bit more user-friendly holding pen to help them kind of sort out cows and calves as they're going. So essentially just created 2 long pens with some extra gates that they can kind of sort as they go. From there, built in just another square with 2 extra gates to kind of just be your push gates. And then the options became, do they want to do a tub? Do they want to try to do more of a bud box design? And so we kind of gave them both options on paper for consideration. So coming from kind of that, what you could call almost a crowd area or a staging area, not going through the barn, and then having all of the handling system come either into a tub and have the lead up alley and chute running along the side of the barn there facing to the east, and then they could still be funneling into the same place that they typically would. We then reminded them that that cement ledge in the the dirt. They're definitely going to want to level out there just from a handler perspective, as well as from a cattle perspective of not having to jump up that big step at the end. So that was one option for them to consider. Also putting in that man gate to make sure that they would be able to be on both sides of the chute in the alley, and then be able to have hopefully just that 1 to 2 people working cattle if they'd need to. The bud box design, pretty comparable. The lead up alley and the chute are set up the very same way, having a man gate, and then just having the square penning coming off, and then have that solid gate shut, bring the cattle back around. So a couple options we gave them. The other thing for consideration with these producers was they had another barn and pasture that they wanted to connect to this permanent facility. So they were already in the process of building a permanent fenced off alley to feed in there. So that's what you see in this bottom left picture, is the alley actually coming from their other barn and other pasture to feed into their holding pens, in addition to being able to bring their cow herd in the fall. So that was kind of our smallest producer. So now we're going to jump the spectrums, and this farm visit was with the rancher who runs about 500 cows. Both him and his wife work full-time on the ranch, and they typically wean everything in the fall and take everything straight to the sale barn, and they just finish and develop their heifers in the pens before they turn everything back out for the winter. So what you see here is kind of the overview of their facilities. The challenge with working with this producer was it was definitely a multi-use type facility. So you can see all the dry lot pens, and then all the cattle are going to come in the fall, enter from the pasture into this front 3-4 pen that's labeled here in the bottom left corner. So they bring all their cow-calf pairs in. They kind of work both horseback and on foot, starting to casually sort the animals, move them to this front 2, into front 1. And then when they're ready to actually bring them into the tub and working facility, they'll push them back here towards the barn in the bottom right corner, and then bring them up this drover's alley into the tub area. And this is your tub chute facility that they're working everything through right here. And everything essentially fills back into all the extra holding pens. So that's kind of the general cattle flow. We also put in some of our proposed modifications. They were also considering kind of creating a round corral to help sort cow-calf pairs. So essentially just bring everything in, have gates going to all these different pens, and then they can just push calves to one pen, push cows to the other pen, and work by horseback real efficiently that way. So the things that we really found with this producer in this setup was, one, we visited in the spring, and they work in the fall. So what you'll see in some of these pictures is still some of the issues that they faced, or some of the aftermath of what they'll face in the fall. Is a lot of it was poor drainage. They would have lots of mud coming right up along the bunk line. They'd have kind of lots of mud coming in here. This was the entrance from the pasture coming into that first pen. And so a lot of the slope came from the pasture across all these pens. And in this top right picture here, you can see their bunk line that they feed, and you can see that it's been pretty wet, gets a little sunk down, but they do kind of have a ridge drainage ditch that they were trying to establish. So part of that was first working on getting some of that drainage to go the right direction. And again, we did visit in the spring, so it was a little wetter than what they'd normally experience when they were getting ready to work their animals. But again, since they keep their heifers over and develop their heifers, they want to make sure that they had better pen drainage as well. Another challenge that the producers had, it didn't notice it so much, but part of it would be you have a lot of solid sides, you have a lot of open fencing, and definitely a lot more different types of sides that the cattle were experiencing, which again, the cattle are mostly used to it, so it's not a big issue there, but it does create some shadows and changes in some of the light that way. So things to consider just to maintain good cattle flow. And as I mentioned, why was the pen so wet that spring is these are the overview pictures. The whole outline you see is the pasture that surrounds those pens, and all of the drainage from that pasture goes straight to the corner of those lots. So that was really something that we wanted to address with that producer as well. So they could at least maintain good pen structure in the spring, so they wouldn't have anything to worry about when they did go to work their cattle in the fall. A few of the other topics that came up for some of the challenges they wanted to address was minor footing, just a little bit more pen maintenance that way. The biggest challenge that they experienced was getting cattle to flow from their holding pens and kind of that lead-up alley coming off the barn into their tub and into their lead-up alley. And in the next picture, you'll see kind of why. The main issue that they were having was more or less the solid sides, but they were ready to rip out some of their alleys and build a bud box to feed into their tub system, thinking that might be the better option. But we started to talk about what are the cattle seeing when they come into that tub area. And so these are the pictures. The bottom right corner here, you see these are the barns. So they're bringing cattle from back by the barn up into this gate here. And again, they do work a lot by horseback to this point, and then everybody on foot by the chute area. So they're bringing cattle in, and you have all solid sides coming in to the tub. And so when cattle come in, this is what they see: solid sides, solid sides. And the cattle have to at least get this far before they see their exit. So they were having a lot of challenges there, a lot of pressure being applied by the horse to get them to load into that tub. So one of our biggest challenges, one, they knew they had to replace it anyway just due to the wood structure itself. So they were ready to just figure out, do we redesign it completely, and what are we going to do with it? The other thing you maybe notice is there are no man gates in there. Yes, they work by horseback, but you also want to make your system as functional as possible. So if you have to just pull somebody from by the chute, or if somebody's taken too long and just gets the cattle up, depending on how many people you have helping that day, it's nice to have that man gate access to from the tub area and to the side of the chute. So we did talk about adding a couple of man gates into their system, just to be able to have that extra help and connection points. And then also talking about what they're going to replace here, making this probably mostly open back on this half with mostly solid here, or at least half solid and then open on top as they replace that, just to give a little bit more visual. And then having this back tin wall, you're going to change the slant of that a little bit better to connect to the lead up alley itself. So I talked about man gates. So when we were proposing putting man gates in, really simple designs. I mean, they use a lot of wood, they use a lot of scrap tin and metal. So shifting just their tub forward, putting in a man gate right here, so they wouldn't really have to adjust too much in their fence line. And the type of design is just a really simple, make your own wood structure, do type of bungee cord back on that post. And then obviously you still want to make sure that you're anchoring that metal tub back in along there, so your tub's not sliding away from that man gate and away from the gate. So kind of a really simple fix there. Again, a very economical full-time ranching family, so they're not looking at spending a whole lot to change. We also mentioned putting in a man gate kind of on the other end, so you don't have to walk all the way around, just from a convenience factor, since they were going to rip out that wall anyway. Just giving them a little bit more accessibility. And then if they wanted to kind of keep the same length on their lead-up area there, even though they really only could fill probably 6 to maybe 8 animals into their tub and into their alley chute. So they really have an oversized area here for what their system's actually holding. But we did encourage them that if they had the extra gate laying around and they were going to, they had a nice strong post on that side, they could definitely put in an extra cut gate. So if they did run into a group of animals, they could at least have that extra cut gate in the middle. And they were going to replace and expand that back wall, so connecting it to that lead up alley a little bit better, just so the cattle weren't coming in making a 90-degree turn, kind of just making a little bit more flowing there, since they had the gates available and we're going to adjust that post. Again, it's a very multi-functional type facility, so not looking at ripping out, starting new, and creating too much more of a permit facility that way. They load out, essentially all the calves get loaded out on semis. You see here, very typical kind of type of old wood loadout. They've maintained it. The challenge here, you can still see they just need to get rid of a tree and keep maintaining some of the boards and always checking for bolts and nails. They had a lot of resourceful materials, being able to make solid side gates if they needed to from different resources. They did a great job being able to utilize some old bin structures to kind of create their own tub going into that lead up alley. They have no issues loading out trucks with this system. It's just more or less talking about the critical points, checking to make sure that there's no rough edges on any of that tin that you use, no rough edges on the bolts, or make sure the integrity of that wood loadout still is maintained, and kind of doing that annual check since you really only use it once a year to make sure that you don't need to do any major repairs there. One other thing that was not a big challenge, but they noticed impacted cattle flow, was in one of their drovers alleys, they did have their water that split the pens. And again, it's a multifunctional facility, not just a handling facility. So one of the challenges is that having this water in the drovers alley, yes, it's great in hot weather, but it did impede cattle flow. And so thinking about those things when you have multi-use facilities. This bottom picture, they did have an extra man gate coming to the alley. So again, you have a lot of transitions and sidings, but again, at least they had some nice accessibility for working man space. I briefly mentioned that they were talking about kind of creating a better way of sorting off their pairs. So they were working with another rancher that had this previous design already built. And so they wanted to essentially make a round pen big enough to bring a group of cow-calf pairs in. All these sides are essentially going to just be your gates that you're going to sort either calves or cows to. They were going to work by horseback, so again, making it big enough that you understand that a horse and rider put more pressure than just a single person on foot. So knowing that really this green circle is most of the cow space, and understanding the pressure that a horse and rider put on in that the corral was pretty important to figure out how many animals they should be bringing into that size of sorting area. We also recommended that they try to extend their drovers alley all the way to their pasture. I think it would be a nice usability feature. Again, the biggest challenge there was water replacement to feed off 3 of their pens. It was about exactly where the alley should be. So again, there was a lot of interesting discussions, a lot of good suggestions, and then understanding the reality of, okay, we're not moving this water, we can't move that electrical pole, so what options can we kind of to hammer through as we go about improving cattle flow and usability. One of our last farm visits, this producer is, they run about 50 to 60 cow-calf pairs. They wanted to be able to run up to 120 yearlings depending on the year if they needed to kind of switch out what they were doing or decide if they were going to custom graze. So this producer, they really were just working with portable equipment at this point, since they had a lot of stuff out on pasture, and then this was their permanent penning. And so inside their barn, they had a couple of spaces for calving pens if they needed, or just a simple head catch, but otherwise they were simply renting portable equipment to work their cattle once a year. So they were really looking to build something a little bit more permanent. They were definitely looking at the prefabricated type systems. So it was more or less working with them on siting and getting the site ready to go and thinking about gate placement and what resources they had, in addition to then how is that going to fit in with what they want to do and the cattle numbers they wanted to run through it. So this is kind of the site that we were talking with them about. All of the cattle would be coming off from a pasture behind the barn here into these pens, and then they typically would set up their portable system right over here. They'd have a whole bunch of portable panels, loop them back after they worked them through a tub and chute, and then sort cows and calves after that. So this is working with the siting location. You can see obviously the hill, so want to make sure most of the cattle flow is going straight up and down a hill, not along a hill, just from a footing standpoint, and really worked with them from that perspective. The overview of those pens, all of them funnel there to the top right corner. So what we proposed is they'll have a prefabricated bud box system, and they've already actually purchased that. And then they've had the prefabricated load up alley and hydraulic chute that they have also purchased at this time already. So what they're currently going to be working on in the next year or so is getting the drover's alley here. They're going to build 4 holding pens. We talked with them depending on what their usability is, and they could definitely put a water access or something in here, or have water access if they needed to hold some cattle, make these sick pens, or if they were going to have any cattle stay over that way. So have a chute. They talked about wanting to have a semi loadout, definitely for their groups of yearlings or a group of calves in the fall. So they wanted to have a lot of flexibility that way. But at least this way, all this holding pens and this drover alley would be solid permanent fencing. And they had resources to a lot of electric poles. So they definitely were going to be able to find their resources pretty economically. So that's why they were willing to spend a little bit more money and get the prefabricated bud box out of kind of your steel tubing, and then the prefabricated lead up alley and chute system that way. So they really were tight on their budget. Both of them work outside the home, and they were getting up into their upper years, but they had family members wanting to come back, so they were definitely keen on handler safety from that perspective. They also had a pasture where they needed to work some cattle, which they had around a water. We talked about putting a little restraint chute out there, building just a straight alley fence, and then they use a lot of their portable animals when they need to go work cattle instead of having to bring them all back to the home place. So definitely a few of the, you can see that you come across a lot of different things when you get out with producers, and everybody has a different scenario that they work with. So that was kind of some of the tips and things that we found, and the scenarios that producers were dealing with, or the challenges in their holding facilities and handling facilities. And I know I went a little bit long, but I'll stop talking and open up for questions, and go ahead and use the chat box feature if you have a question that you want to ask, or if you have a comment on why we recommended something or a specific issue, go ahead and share that. While you're typing your questions, I'm just going to pop our Short Animal Care Wednesday webinar poll up, so you can kind of answer those couple of questions as you're typing in your questions too. Well, as you're still thinking of any questions, if you have those, I want to thank everybody for joining today. You can see my contact information, and I apologize that Joe wasn't able to join us to kind of give his more engineering perspective sides of things. If you've got some questions on maybe some facility or engineering things, Joe's email is there on the bottom, darrington.dvm@gmail.com. If you want to learn more about the project or talk more about facility designs and getting cattle flowing through facilities, you can see my contact information there. Our next Animal Care Wednesday webinar is going to be August 1st at 11 o'clock Central Time, and the topic there is going to be a little bit more focused on some parasite management, and so we'll have Dr. Mike Hildreth talking about cattle and sheep parasite management. So tune in tune in Wednesday, August 1st at 11 Central Time for that one. So not seeing any questions, I'm going to say thanks everybody, and we'll see you at the next Animal Care Wednesday webinar.